part 2 second, and do part 1, which I think is dismissal. Dismissal is probably the highest thing to do. It's 40 minutes, so it would be, you'll spend 45 minutes doing that. Something like that. My advice is to probably do that last, and rather than read the case and then the questions, read the questions first. And as I said already, the questions come in 2 bits. You read part of the case, and then you answer about 3 questions, 2 or 3 questions, and then you read another bit, and I think you read 1 more question after that, or I think it's either 1 or 2 questions after that. Okay? So that's my advice. So because you've got your hand mark, you're
The rewards to attendance.
Okay. Does anybody have any more questions about the test? Because it's tomorrow evening, isn't it? Tomorrow evening? Is that correct? Oh, it's that's the morning, is it? All right, so it's 9 till 11 morning. Okay. Usually these things are 9. So, all right. Do you have any questions you want to ask me about that? As I've said already, that second part, which is all about performance of rating, focuses solely on reliability and validity. And so basically I give you some measures which are subjective, or they could be objective. So some of them might say the number of this, or the number of that, which is an objective measure. And remember, any objective measure is automatically reliable. Any objective measure, you just have to count. If you were trying to count, and you're trying to count, you'll come up with the same number. If you don't come up with the same number, they'll be very, very, very similar. And the only difference between them will be just that it doesn't have to add and Yvonne's slightly more accurate in her addition. But that should be the only difference, right? So if the measure is the number of shoes sold, or the number of shoes sold, exceeding $120 a pair, then that's a measure where the reliability should be very high. Right? And when you are talking about validity and reliability, use words like low reliability, medium reliability, high reliability, or low validity, medium validity, high validity. Okay? And remember, with validity, it's all about how closely the measure, right, or the rating reflects the underlying performance. How closely does it mirror or match or reflect the underlying performance? So the behaviors in the task or the outputs associated with the task, how closely does it mirror those? That's what validity is all about. Whereas reliability is all about consistency. Reliability is about different raters having a similar or the same opinion about what the rating should be. Okay, so reliability is all about consistency. Validity is all about how closely the measures match or mirror the underlying performance on the job, in the tasks. Okay? Behaviors or outputs or whatever. Okay? Here's another hint. If you see a measure, you can't observe it. You can't observe it. It's in someone's head. And you're trying to guess what's in their head. It won't be reliable. Okay? It won't be reliable. Let's say one of the measures is knowledge of blah, blah, blah. Whatever that is. It won't be reliable. Because I'm trying to guess how much knowledge you have or you have. And I'm trying to rate that. I can't observe it. It's not expressed as behaviors. It's not expressed as outputs. So I'm guessing what's in your head, how much knowledge you have. I don't know, right? And of course, it could be expressed in various ways, possibly through behavior, but it's much better for it to be expressed as behavior. Like in one, I'll give you an example. One test I said, I think you had good exposure to that in that class on performance appraisal. We had the waiters, and knowledge of international was one of the ratings. Right? Well, that's in someone's head. How can you observe that? How can you know how much knowledge someone has of international food? How can you rate it consistently? You can't. Right? So anything you can't see, anything you can't observe, will be guaranteed to be unreliable. Guaranteed low reliability. All right? Anything you can't see, right? You can't observe. So if I ask you about any aspect of performance where the rater can't observe or watch, right, directly what's going on, then it will have low reliability. Guaranteed. Think about it. Think about it. Doesn't that make perfect sense? Because we're guessing. We're guessing about how good you are. We're trying to read your mind. And how can we? You need to see it expressed in behavior. Remember the waiter? One of the ratings was empathy with children. Remember? Rating their behavior in terms of how they set the children up with crayons and with the high chairs and so on. That's something observable. We can watch that. We can check that. We can see that. There will be a certain degree of reliability to watching that. Different raters will have similar opinions. But empathy, that's something you can only see inside someone's head. Right? You can't see that. It's invisible. It's intangible. And because it's invisible, you all have different opinions. Like, for example, if I try to rate certain things about Yvonne's personality, just on the basis of, looking at or the character, right? How can I know? Unless I've seen behavior, right? How can I know? Does that make sense? Okay, moving on. And as I told you yesterday with the dismissal question, everything is going to be on a comparison of should I fire someone for this ground or that ground? And whenever we make a comparison, we do it on the basis of substantive grounds and procedure fairness. We have to consider both. We don't just consider one of those. We have to consider both. And remember I told you, if you're unsure, poor performance is almost always the hardest way of firing someone. And redundancy is almost always the easiest. And misconduct is false in between. Okay? So if you're unsure, there are these little hints, little rules of thumb that might help you. Okay? All right? Good. Okay, now today is all about negotiation or bargaining. Now, there are lots of books you can read on bargaining, and there are lots of different types of bargaining. And if you take a diploma in alternative dispute resolution procedures, you'll know a lot about bargaining and negotiation. I'm not focusing on all of those today. We don't have time. I'm only focusing on the most common, the most famous, and the most useful, and it's called distributive bargaining. Okay? It's called distributive bargaining. It's traditional bargaining, and it's win-lose. It's win-lose. It's also called zero-sum bargaining. There's a fixed pie, and we're arguing or negotiating for a bigger share of it. And we are assuming that my gain is your loss. And if I lose, you'll gain. So distributive bargaining is very traditional and very competitive. Right? It's competitive and it's very short-term oriented. But it is also the most useful. So when you're going to negotiate for a car, this is the kind of bargaining you'll use. If you're going to negotiate on the streets of Mumbai, right? And I notice we don't have any Indians at all. I don't know what that means, but anyway. Does it mean they're all studying for the test? I hope so. Okay. All right. So on the streets of Mumbai, there's this very long stretch downtown in Colaba, where there's a very long market. And I haven't been to Shanghai or Hong Kong or Beijing, and I'm sure there are similar kinds of markets. And basically, you go in there and you negotiate hard for any item, and you try and get the best deal you can. That is traditional distributive bargaining, okay? And that's what we're going to focus on today. Now there's something else. There's something else called integrated bargaining. Integrated bargaining is win-win bargaining. It's also called mutual gains bargaining, okay? And I'm not going to talk about it today, but it is very difficult to do, okay? It is very difficult to do, and it's only useful about 2 or 3% of the time, okay? There are some famous examples of how it's been useful, but they are far and few between. Any kind of traditional bargaining that's short-term, that's transactional, that is with a shopkeeper, that is, you know, I'm trying to get the best deal now, and I'm never come back again, ever to the shop, is going to be distributive, all right? So when you're buying a car, when you're buying a house, when you're negotiating with a supplier, you may or may not ever see again, you may or may not have a long-term relationship with, it'll be distributive bargaining. The sole cases I'm aware of with integrated bargaining involve a very long-term relationship, very long-term, strong mutual respect, strong desire to work together, and a strong sense of a combined fate or a similar fate. That if I hurt you, I'll be hurting myself. If you hurt me, you'll be hurting yourself. Right? So integrated bargaining, which is quite rare, typically occurs between two partners who both respect each other, who are in it for the long term, and are each concerned about the other's welfare. So this kind of bargaining is more suitable, for example, between husband and wife when you've married for 10 years or 20 years or whatever, right? Or alternatively, between a management and a union, where the management really respects the union, or at least feels that the union cannot be destroyed and they have to accept whatever, the union is there, and they're trying to work as closely as they can with the union for their own mutual benefit. But integrated bargaining is very difficult. I'm not going to talk about it at great length. One of the most famous cases actually involves two friends of mine. Okay? This famous case of integrated bargaining, the academic is a friend of mine who studied it. His name is Ray Phelps. He's at the University of Western Australia. And the negotiator is also a close friend of mine. His name is Chris Elliott. Chris Elliott, I can't remember the name of the town. He was the mayor of this small city north of Perth in Australia. And I can't remember whether it's Rockhampton or Rockingham. Do any of you know? I've never been to Perth. I've lived next door to someone from Perth 3 times in my life. But I've never been to Perth. Anyway, this guy who was my next door neighbor in Canada, I lived 3 times next to someone from Perth, 3 times in my life. Extraordinary coincidence. And I'd never been there, never, right? So he's the mayor of this small city of 100,000 people. And he tried to negotiate with the union using integrated bargaining. Very strongly focused on trying to grow the size of the pie, make both parties better off. Very strongly focused on problem solving. Having conversations with the other party again and again and again. Totally open-ended bargaining, right? This has nothing to do with most relationships. This is a very good, positive relationship. By the way, you know why I'm saying all this? Because one person wrote in the assignment, I have nothing to learn from this reading about distributive bargaining. This is the way to do things now. This is why I'm making this speech. Okay? This person is dreaming. Okay? This is really uncommon, and it's very hard to do. Very hard to do. You have to have a lot of respect, you have to have a lot of time on your hands, and typically you negotiate these open-ended agreements, and you keep revisiting any issue, right? And so you have to have an open door to the other side, to keep bargaining, possibly monthly, come back, have another discussion, look for a solution that will satisfy both parties. It's very time intensive, and it really involves the other side caring about the relationship and about the other party. This is rare. This is rare. In New Zealand, almost nobody does this, okay? The only parties that have ever even attempted to do this are certain branches of the government, typically under the Labour, when Labour was in power, from 1999 to 2008, negotiating with the Public Service Association, PSA, but not with any other unions. All the other unions, distributive, right? The whole private sector, distributive. Okay, so that's a very long introduction, but I felt that it was necessary because one person felt that he or she needed to tell me that distributive bargaining was no longer relevant. And so I thought I'd better make a bit of a speech, all right? Because that's lunatic fringe territory. Okay, so let me tell you about distributive bargaining.